In April 1968, after 2 years of training and 6 months on the Special Forces A team at Fort Bragg, I arrived at the 5th Special Forces Group, Vietnam. After going through a few days of orientation, I went to see the assignment officer, an instantly dislikable major, who told me I was going to FOB-1 C&C. What's C&C? I asked. SOG, the major replied. Back at Fort Bragg, all the senior NCOs offered the same advice. Stay out of SOG. They get people killed. I thought you had to volunteer for SOG, I said. You just did, the major said with a smirk. I took the 300-mile flight up the coast to Da Nang, where I spent a night at SOG's House 22. It was sort of a combination flop house and brothel, drenched in alcohol. Somebody had the job of running this place. To this day, I bet his family is saying, "Oh, Dad never talked about what he did in the war." The next day, I caught a quick hop to FOB-1 and received the now famous SOG briefing. It wasn't the fancy briefing you may have read about, where a curtain is dramatically drawn back from a map to startled gasps. I was simply told SOG was fighting a secret war in Laos. Because we were pretending Laos was neutral, we couldn't wear uniform insignia or dog tags when we were across the fence. They even borrowed a line from the TV show Mission Impossible.
As always, should you or any of your IM force be caught or killed, the Secretary will disavow any knowledge of your actions. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
I noticed they left out the "your mission if you decide to accept it" part. Finally, they told us we couldn't reveal what we did for 20 years, or somebody would throw us in jail. Back then, we believed that stuff. At the end of the briefing, I was assigned to a Hatchet Force platoon of Cambodian mercenaries, and spent the rest of the day getting acquainted with John Allen, the platoon sergeant, and setting up my combat equipment. The next morning, I met with a Cambodian mercenary platoon. They were far from impressive. "These guys any good?" I asked Allen. "No, they suck," he said. On their last operation, they ran on Lieutenant Dahl. He got hit with chunks of a Chinese claymore. "That's why you're here." That was encouraging. But the Cambode platoon would have to wait. That afternoon, I was ordered to fill a vacancy on a recon team. I went and found the recon team leader, and he told me I was going to be the 1-2 on a mission the next day. Of course, I had no idea what that was. "How long you been here?" he asked. "Coming up on 24 hours, I answered. The sergeant laughed and almost patiently explained that the 1-2 is his radio operator. I was to walk behind him, close enough to quickly hand him the handset, but not too close. That was it, training over. He got a PRC-25 radio and was relieved that I knew how to work it. We packed it along with some rations in a little rucksack. He gave me a map and said, "We're not going to RON, rest overnight, in this target." It struck me as a strange thing for him to say. That night, laying on my poncho liner, I started thinking about going into combat for the first time. It should feel scary, but it didn't. I had learned about fear in jump school. I thought I'd be afraid the first time I jumped out of an airplane. But I wasn't. After 2 weeks of the swing landing trainer, the 34-foot tower, and hundreds of parachute landing falls, I just jumped. All I thought about was doing it right. You exit the plane and you land on the ground, just like everybody else. After all my training, I figure combat will probably go the same way. With nothing else to do, I took out the map and tried to visualize what the target looked like. It's a big draw, no, more like a bowl, with steep sides and flat land with a decent-sized stream in the south. In Laos. Somewhere in Laos. Just some little piece of a much bigger puzzle that's way above my pay grade. I put it down. As I drift off, I hear the sergeant saying, "We're not going to rest overnight in this target." The next morning, I gear up. The stuff is heavy. They didn't let you carry around 400 rounds of ammunition and a bunch of hand grenades at Fort Bragg. I realize I haven't even had a chance to test fire my CAR-15. Too late now. Sometimes you just have to have faith. like you do with a parachute. I may not know what I'm doing, but at least I look the part. I joined the team on the chopper pad. My presence was acknowledged by nods. As we boarded, the team leader put his hand on the shoulder of one of the mercenaries and called out above the sound of the rotors, "We're not going to RON." It wasn't long till we were airborne, heading west, flying low and fast at treetop level. Quickly we were over small wooded foothills. Leaning out, I could see a high ridge of mountains ahead of us in the distance. After about 15 minutes, our airspeed slowed and we landed on a small cleared hilltop at the foot of the mountains. It was the 101st Airborne Division's Fire Support Base Vegal. The mountains ahead formed the eastern ridge of the famed Ashaw Valley. We sat idling for a while, waiting for Covey, our forward air controller, and the gunships. Then we were off, heading northwest, looping around the northern end of the Ashaw Valley. Its western ridge was fully owned and operated by the North Vietnamese Army. We gained a lot of altitude as we crossed into Laos. I had made a parachute jump from 3,000 feet, and we were way higher than that. Below, the terrain flattened out. As we approached the target and began to descend, black puffs of smoke, anti-aircraft fire, exploded around us. It's an interesting experience when you're sitting in the open door with your feet hanging out. We made a quick circle to the north and headed east. The team was all smiles. Even the aircraft commander turned to celebrate. We were not going to RON in this target. When I got back to FOB-1, I had every intention of finding out why the team leader was adamant about not staying overnight in the target. But I never had a chance. A couple of days later, all the Cambodian mercenaries were fired. They were stripped of their military equipment and marched out the gate with only their personal possessions, which for many was their underwear. Since I no longer had a job, I was sent to Mylock to run a platoon of Brew Mountain Yards. 50 years later, when I was researching Dawson's War, I found the answer. Our target that day was the main hub of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was designated Oscar 8. SOG had been there before. The sergeant was right. This was no place to RON. If SOG was a good place to get killed, Oscar 8 was the best place to get killed. In June of 1967, SOG attempted to infiltrate Oscar 8 for the first time. Their mission was no less than to kill the commanding general of the North Vietnamese Army. Yes, you heard that right. Apparently, the brass at the Pentagon were spending more time reading G.I. Joe comic books than intelligence reports. I made a video about it. I'll put a link in the description. A Jolly Green pilot attempted to rescue what was left of a recon team from Oscar 8 in November of 1967. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions. By 1970, SOG attempted to put teams into Oscar 8 at least a dozen times. On 4 occasions, the insertion was successful. Not one of those teams were extracted without the loss of life. It's interesting to know that I was being sent into a death trap on my first mission. But why waste somebody with experience when they're just going to get killed anyway? You'll find my book Dawson's War worthwhile. Rather than just accounts of this mission and that mission, I take you with 3 Americans and 2 Brew Mountain tribesmen as they spend a year running SOG operations. You're going to enjoy being in their company and get a real feel for what it was like. The book has over 400 5-star ratings on Amazon, a feat Amazon says only happens with 1 out of every 2,000 self-published books. As always, hit the like and subscribe buttons and ring the bell to watch my future videos. Hit the super thanks button. I promise I'll have a drink in your honor. Thanks for watching.